Very early in the book, you tell Ronnie Hawkins a bit about part of your family, and you say to him, "You could say I'm an expert in persecution."
This is a certain point. We were driving, which we did a lot of driving, and I was telling, Levon was asking me about my background, and they knew something of my background, but it was confusing to them. And Ronnie, so Levon is driving, I was sitting here, Ronnie's here, he's sleeping. The other guys are in the back seat sleeping. Sitting there, and I get to the part in the story where I'm explaining to Levon that I am half North American Indian and half Jewish. And it's like, what? Ronnie Hawkins wakes up and says, whoa, wait a minute. It's bad enough young Robbie here's a redskin. Now he's a Jew on top of it? Where's my wallet? So anyway, that combination, when I was growing up, I didn't bring it up too much. I just kind of went with the Canadian part, you know. Because it did seem like mixing very different worlds together. And what do you get? Let's not go into it. So also, there's part of growing up in this too, because I didn't know about my Jewish heritage until I was 12 or 13 years old. So as a young kid, growing up and going to the Six Nation Indian Reserve, where my mom was born and raised, between there and Toronto, and as I was telling you, it felt like kind of a privilege to be able to go between these two worlds. And as a young kid, I thought, at Six Nations, I thought, whoa, they're so lucky. They got it made. Look what they can do. Look at how their lives are lived. This is beautiful. This is before I was old enough for anybody to say to me something like, too bad about the Indians, huh? I didn't know that part of it. And I had relatives that could tell what the weather was going to be in 3 days. They could tell that they didn't climb a tree, they ran up a tree. They could do things, this is a boy thing, but I had cousins we'd be walking along and all of a sudden they would leap up and snap off a branch and make like a beautiful weapon within a couple of minutes. I'm like, that's the business there. That's what I want to be able to do. Then, on top of that, it seemed like everybody at Six Nations played an instrument, or sang, or danced, or told stories. So I thought, I need to get in this club. This is because the first time in your life that you ever hear somebody playing music sitting right there, it's a different experience. And you can hear when they're singing, you could hear the breathing, and you could hear the fingers on the strings and the hands on the water drums and everything. And it was like, ooh, this is cool. So they started, at a pretty young age, they started saying, okay, on the guitar, you put your finger here and one there. And I was learning this stuff, and every time I would want to learn more. I would want to go further. And I did, and I kept working on it, and they kept showing me stuff. And then by the time I was like 12 years old or something, I thought, I'm getting as good at this as any of them. You know, there could be something cooking here. So anyway, from this humbleness of Six Nations, it planted the seeds for me. It's where I got connected to music. It's where I got to a place where I thought, I need to do this. And then there's this whole other story, which we were talking about back there, that I heard when I was around 9 years old, of an elder telling the story of Hiawatha and the Peacemaker. It blew me over. The sound of his voice, and at the beginning he did a blessing like Clarence, and right away it just pulled you in. And he told this story, and the story is amazing. I have a book on it that I did for young readers. And in the Haudenosaunee, in the Six Nation people, it's such an important story. And it's a story of peace, and it's a story of unity. So anyway, you put this piece together with that piece, and the music, and the stories, and all of this stuff, and it shot me into outer space.
You divided your time between Six Nations, but you were growing up in Toronto, and you talk very lovingly about the sights and sounds and smells of the area that you grew up in. And being in the city, of course, you had musical friends, and soon you had learned those chords, and you had risen to that level. And now you had people your own age who were playing music. So talk about the first bands you were in.
Well, I saw back there some of these pictures that are shown. There's a picture of one of them in the first group I was in. It was called the Rhythm Chords. And in that group was this guy, Pete Traynor, who made in Canada the best guitar amps for Traynor amps. And we hooked up, we were young kids. I mean, he was a few years older than me, but he was very inspirational to me at a young age. So I was in this group, the Rhythm Chords. Then it was like you keep graduating. Then I had a group called Robbie and the Robots. I know, I know. Don't pick on me. And then another group, and all of these, and everyone is a learning process. And then one of the groups I was in, we had the opportunity to open for this southern band called Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, a rockabilly band. And I had never seen them, but I had heard about them, and the reputation was incredible, that they are amazing. And so this was like, okay, we need to play good that night. And we played, and we did try to play good, and we did hopefully, that they would take notice of this, of our group. And then when Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks took the stage, they just blew the roof off the joint. I had never seen this kind of aggression, this kind of power in music, this excitement, this showmanship. It was wild. And Ronnie Hawkins was a showman. He came leaping through the air, and he would land right behind the piano player and wind him up like a monkey, and then charge over and get to the microphone just in time to come back in singing. So anyway, this was authentic. This was real Southern rock and roll rockabilly. So I just wanted to get some on me. I wanted some of whatever I could learn from this, whatever I could steal from this, whatever could rub off. So I tried to hang around them and not get in the way. I tried to just be like somebody that they wouldn't say, why are you here? They wouldn't bust me. And I did, and I was learning stuff, and I was soaking up their musical language, all of it. And one day, when I was 15 years old, I heard Ronnie Hawkins say, I got to go in the studio, I got to cut a new album. I need to get some songs. And I went, and I wrote 2 songs. And it was such a long shot. I went and I wrote 2 songs, and I brought them to him. And I could tell he wasn't all that excited about, like I said, I got a couple of songs. You want to hear them? And I could feel the, okay, I could, and I played him the 2 songs. He said, well, I'll be damned. Son, I'm going to record both of those damn tunes. And I needed to be, I couldn't just bubble over and go crazy. I had to be like, oh, well, that's good to hear. I'm sure you'll do them very well, And so anyway, that was an opening of the door. Then, when I was 16 years old, he called me and said, why don't you come down to Arkansas here? I'm going to try you out. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot. I just think there might be something going on here. We'll see. And so I did everything. I had to beg, borrow, and steal. I sold my guitar. I did everything just to be able to get to Arkansas for this opportunity. And in the book, this is how I start the storytelling. I take a train from Canada, and I am going south to the holy land of rock and roll. I am going to where it grows out of the ground. This is mythology to me, right? And on that train ride down there, everything that got me to this place is flying by, and my imagination is going crazy in all of this. And I think, I've got to figure this out. I've got to let these guys know that this could work. So when I get there, Ronnie Hawkins is quick to say, son, you're 16 years old. You need to be 21 to play in the places that we play. You're inexperienced. You don't play well enough yet. And you're from Canada. This is a Southern thing. This kind of music, rock and roll, R&B, it's a Southern thing. So I've got my handicaps are like up to here, and I don't know. I still don't quite understand it to this day. But I picked up a guitar, and I went in the other room, and I thought, I'm not coming out until I can blow some people's mind. And I thought, I've got to let Ronnie Hawkins and Levon Helm, who was kind of his musical ears, Levon, he had music just running through every bone in his body. And Ronnie depended on him to whether something was real or not. And so I showed these guys that there was nobody that was going to work harder, be more dedicated, and I was going to get this Southern element under my skin, and we were going to win this battle. And at some point, Ronnie said to me, in this thing, and I could see it's growing, it's getting there, I'm overcoming some of these things, and he said to me, son, I think you got some potential.
You mentioned Levon there, and you bonded with Levon quite early, and you talk so lovingly about Levon throughout the entire book. But those early days, you talked about him almost assuming the role of the big brother that you didn't have growing up.
True.
And musically, you looked up to him because he was sort of the young cat who was going somewhere in Ronnie's band. Great voice, could play like the Dickens, and you two bonded very, very early.
True.
And from that, things grew. And one by one, you began to, as you're always on the road touring, you began to find more appropriate members of the band than what were currently in it. And one by one, Rick, Richard, Garth were all brought into the fold. Do you want to talk a bit about how each of those musicians you found?
Well, as my status with Levon and Ronnie grew, it's over the course of the next few months, all of the guys that were from the South in the Hawks, one by one, they were leaving. Some of them just wanted to go back home. Some of them just wanted to be in the South, you know. And as each one left, Levon and I, it took on the responsibility of keeping an eye out for talent. Now, Ronnie spent a lot of time playing in Canada because the hours were more reasonable and they paid you more. It was, you know, it was like, what don't we understand about this? And people loved him and appreciated our music so much. So over a period of time, everywhere that we're looking, mostly we were looking to in places, you know, in New York and you know, in the Eastern Seaboard area for some talent too. But we ran into these guys that were in little bands like I was playing as an opening group for Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. Saw this guy, Rick Danko, and you could just tell there was something about this guy musically, that he had a certain gift. And he looked really good too, which Ronnie always, his thing was, in all the places we played, he thought, if I got a good-looking band, that'll bring in the girls and the boys will follow. You know? It's kind of like a, you know, where, so anyway, you know, so Rick Danko, Levon and I say, this guy, he could be something. And Ronnie said, I know, I've already offered him a job. So we're like, wow, okay. So Rick comes into the fold. Then we're playing another place where this little band is playing, and they're a really good band, all of them. But in the group, there's a 17-year-old kid who sings like Bobby Blue Bland. You know, he's like, where does that come from? Incredible. And he's a great piano player. So the piano player is leaving the Hawks. We say, what about Richard Manuel? So then Ronnie figures out a way, we pull Richard in. The next thing is Garth Hudson We had never known a musician of the caliber, of the talent, of the imagination of Garth Hudson. He could have been playing with Miles Davis or the symphony orchestra. He was like, his knowledge of music, what he had, when he sat down and played, I mean, we couldn't even hardly breathe, let alone play at the same time as him. So we were amazed by him. And it was a tricky thing getting Garth into the group because his parents had sent him to serious music conservatory training. And if he joined a rock and roll band, it would be like flushing it all down the toilet. It would have been a big waste. So it was like, what are we going to do? So Ronnie ends up going to talk to his parents.
That's a good story.
And Ronnie, in his southern way, but with incredible charm, says, you know what? Your son, for this group, is going to be the musical teacher. This is a very prestigious position, right? So they were like, oh, really? Said, oh, yeah, no. And it will elevate the level of music to a whole other place. We have to have him in there. Plus, it's going to be very good for his career. So anyway, they said, well, that doesn't sound too bad. So thankfully, we got Garth into the fold. Now, with this group of musicians, it was a whole new day. It was a whole different, because people were coming and going, and some of them were great, and some of them weren't, and of crazy people, and all kinds of stuff going on. With these guys, we felt like we had something. Levon and I felt like this is what we've been looking for. And we worked, and we practiced, and we studied. Music and challenges things, and we grew, and we got better, and we got better, until finally we got too better, and we had to leave Ronnie Hawkins because it was a different musicality that we were visualizing and searching for. And Ronnie's thing, which was great fun and rockabilly, but we were going to another place now. And so we moved on from that, but we still played the Chitlin circuit down south, and we played, in the Northeast, and we played in Canada, and in the meantime, just trying to get better and better and gather more music all the time. Up until we get a call from this folk singer guy, this guy, Bob Dylan, and it's like, oh God, what does he want?
Just before we get to Bob, you tell a couple of great stories about life on the road, because Ronnie Hawkins was a big draw. Ronnie made a lot of money, but when you split off from him, you had a little bit of Levon and the Hawks had a little bit of a rougher time. You were playing, but not drawing as much money as probably Ronnie was. And you tell stories about being on the road, but there's that particular story about you being at the Skyline Lounge in Fort Worth, where not only
Right.
are you playing, but there's the whole thing about protecting your equipment.
So this is, in the book, it's quite an involved, and for good reason, it's quite an involved thing. But just to give you a little bit of insight into this, we've never been booked in this club before, and it's in Fort Worth, Texas. We pull up to the place and think, uh-oh. And we've played some funky joints, right? And we go, uh-oh. we look at it, and there's no roof on the place. The roof has been blown off and burnt off. So they call it the Skyline Lounge, right? So we go and we set up to play the first night. And in this place, it's very big. And there's this huge dance floor down the center. And all along the sides, there's tables and chairs, right? Just a big, big nightclub. And at the back, a big, long bar. So we go, we set up, we get on stage to play, and there's nobody there. It's just us playing, right? And we're like, you know, this is our job. We gotta just, and all of a sudden, on the dance floor, I can see this figure moving towards the stage, moving closer and closer to the stage. And all of a sudden, it's like, it's swirling and whirling. And I'm looking, and as it gets closer, I realize it's a one-armed go-go dancer. And she has go-goed right up to the front of the stage like we're in show business, right? You know, like we're all part of the entertainment here. And so you're like, okay, it's a Twilight Zone, I guess, right? So in the course of this night, in a little while, two couples come in and they sit over on this side of the stage. A little while later, another couple comes in and they sit over on this side of the stage. She whirls over because her job is to get them to get up and dance, because I think the motto is the more you dance, the more you drink, or something like that, right? That's why, you know, she's hired there. So anyway, she dances over to this couple. They're like these people, and they're trying to, you can see, they're trying to not look, right? And then she goes over to the other and goes back and forth. Finally, on this side, one couple gets up, and they start dancing a little bit. On the other side, another couple gets up, and they start dancing. And it's like, okay, I guess she's doing her job. I guess it's working out. They're out there dancing away, and a fight breaks out between the two couples. One of the guys pulls out a thing and shoots tear gas in the face of the other guy. Clouds of tear gas are floating by, floats up to the stage. We're all crying now. We're playing music and crying like babies, and these guys are scrambling around trying to figure out what, you know, who's fighting who out there. So anyway, we know that this is an odd situation. The owner of this club, who comes and goes, and he's like a weird guy, and he's always like tweaked inside. We didn't know what's up with this dude. But anyway, he comes and he says, it's getting better. We're getting somewhere here. We're like, we are? Really? This is working? You know? So anyway, his name's Jack, right? So he's like, okay, I'll see you later, blah, blah, blah. And he had another club somewhere, I think over in Dallas, and he would go back and forth. And he would come back, and during the course of the week, crowds did start building up. And we had to do this stuff that you were talking about. He said, because we have no roof on the place and everything, I've got bad news. You have to stay here and guard your equipment at night, because otherwise someone will steal it. And we're like, we got to stay up all night long and guard our equipment. Anyway, there's a whole episode that goes on in that. The week goes on, and it just gets weirder. I mean, there's more people coming, but the place, everything, we're just thinking, when is this going to be over? And we have no money. We are so broke, and there's a whole thing, you know, in the book about us actually having to steal food, you know, in the meantime, until until this guy Jack pays us. So anyway, we finish up the gig there after a week. We move on, playing other places, but 3 months later, on television, we see there's Jack on TV. Jack is Jack Ruby, who has just killed Oswald, who assassinated President Kennedy. That's the kind of places we were playing. You know?
You're going to have a great time reading this book, trust me. Well, let's get back to that folk singer then. You get a call. He's trying out something new. He started to plug in. He has a couple of shows in the summer of '65 that he needs a band. He needs some musicians to help him out. And you're approached. And then you and Levon are approached. And you say, we'll check this out.
Well, it was so unique, the very idea of this guy. He is a hero in folk music. He is the man. He has people adoring him in this, and he decides that he wants to move on from these protest songs and about the war and all this stuff, and he wants to play rock and roll. And so he's saying, you know, first of all, he asked me if I would come and play guitar with him. And I said, no, I have a group, you know, we're a brotherhood and everything. And he said, oh, no, we got to figure this out. You know, I really need for you to play just these 2 jobs with me. So I said, I don't know, but if Levon could play with us too, we might be able to figure out how to make this work. So we figure it out. Levon comes, we play Forest Hill Stadium in New York and the Hollywood Bowl. So the first night at Forest Hill Stadium, we go out there and we start playing, and people start storming the stage with venom in their eyes and throwing stuff and booing. And we're like, oh my God, they're like, they really don't like us, you know? Right? They stormed the stage. People got up on the stage and knocked over some of the musicians. It was like, how can this, I've never heard of anything like this in music. I mean, how bad do you have to be to make people act like this, right? And mind you, I didn't think that it was that great what we were doing. You know, I thought this needs work. It needs a lot of work. So then he says, okay, the next job's at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. They're more reasonable out there. So we go play there. Doesn't go that well. Doesn't go that well at all. And we think, well, this was just a strange experience. Be nice to now just get back to what we do and everything. After it, Bob says, that was fantastic. Let's do a whole tour. We're like, this guy's crazy, you know? So we say the only way we could do this if it was with all the guys, it was with the Hawks. We are a group. We're not going to splinter off. We don't do that kind of stuff. So through a course, we figure it out. He comes, hears us play, likes it. We start rehearsing. But I realize that he's really good at playing by himself with a guitar and a harmonica. He's really good at this. Playing with a band it's like he doesn't really know that you all need to know where the song begins, you know, and like, when are we done with the song? Is there going to be an ending, or do we just fizzle out, or what do we do? So we go on this thing with him, and it turns into a tour of North America, Australia, and all over Europe. And every place and everywhere we play, people boo and throw stuff at us. Now, in show business, like the way they do it in show business is when this happens, you make adjustments. You say, they don't seem to be liking this part. Maybe we should not do this, or should change that, or do this differently, or change the order of songs. It's getting worse. Bob now says, I've got a new song nobody's ever heard before. Let's start with that one. And from there, it becomes a thing of us against the world, is how it feels. Everybody thinks it's wrong what we're doing. We're listening to this music and we're getting better at it every day. And we're starting to feel like we're not wrong, you're wrong. And the audacity to actually think that what we're doing is really good. And all of you people in the whole world are completely wrong about this, right? And it got to a point where it's like, what do you do in a case like this? What do you do? So what we did was we started playing bolder, faster, harder, and in your face. And it became a full-on musical revolution. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but there was something happening in this, and music was never the same again. But we did, when it's happening, you don't sense that at all. So we get through this tour. We finish up, and now these things are coming out with, all of the concerts, and we end up at Albert Hall, and everybody's there, all the music people are there, and the people are booing us, and it's going on and on. And in the course of this, for this to be happening, and to think, we're doing something really good here, it's so strange, So we finish the tour. We come back to New York. We're catching our breath. And Bob said, I think that went really well. Let's book another tour. And it was like, I don't know of another person on this planet that would have the nerve to think that the world is going to come around. They're going to realize, everybody is going to realize you're wrong and we're right. That's how it's actually going to come around. It's just like, whoa, this in the history of music, before and after, nothing ever like it. before or since, and we weren't winning the battle, but we won the war.
It's interesting how a motorcycle proved to be a bit of a pivot point, because you had come off the tour, you were resting in New York, you were on a bit of a retainer, and there were plans for another tour, and then you got a call from upstate New York. Bob had been on a motorcycle, and things didn't go well. And then all of a sudden the tour was called off, everything sort of quieted down, and while he was recovering, because he had moved his base of operations up to Woodstock, and his manager Albert Grossman was up there, and you would get invited to go up, and at some point you were invited. Things weren't so great in New York. You were looking for a place where you and the rest of the musicians could forge your own sound. And in Woodstock, the opportunity seemed to open itself up to you, and so you moved up there. And then that pivot point becomes your time in Woodstock, where the band, first the basement tapes, if you want to talk about that, but then how the band coalesces and you become this sound that you were looking for.
It had been a dream of mine to have some kind of a place, some kind of a sanctuary, where it would be like a workshop that the other guys and I could go every day like a clubhouse, and we'd work on music and ideas and discover and process things and do what our calling was. We had been gathering so much music from the side of the road of all these places we played, and we had brought it all in. We were absorbing it. We were bringing it into our soul of a sound that had yet to be discovered. Because we were on the road all the time. You're just out there, you can't discover nothing. You're just going from one place to another. To have a place like that, and in my imagination, I thought about Les Paul. Mm-hmm. Les Paul was this guitar genius guy that invented guitars, but he made recordings years ago in his house, in a place I think it was in New Jersey or upstate or something, and he had like echo chambers in the side of a cliff, and it was his workshop, his place, and he could make this sound, and he could do, and I thought, what a dream that is. So when we went up to Woodstock, we found a place outside of town in West Saugerties. We found this ugly pink house out in the middle of 100 acres, where you thought, we ain't gonna bother nobody and nobody's gonna bother us. This is the workshop. This is the clubhouse. Wow. So we got in there. Some of the guys could live there. We set up equipment in the basement, and it was just a setup. We had microphones and a little mixer and a little tape recorder. It was everything that I had dreamt of. And we thought, okay, now, because our thing with Bob Dylan was just a passing thing. We were, the Hawks / what was going to become the band. We were on a mission of our own. This was just something really weird and curious in the meantime. So anyway, we get up there, where I get the place set up. I say to Bob, you gotta come and check out our clubhouse. It's really got a vibe. So we go out, we're driving out there, we're driving, and Bob says, where is this place? How far is it? I said, oh, it's just out here a ways, you'll see it. And we get off the road, and then we go up this side road, and we're going way up this side road. He said, boy, nobody's gonna find you out here. It's like the solitude, the privacy just felt like such a privilege. So we get to this house, Bob looks at the place and it's like, it is ugly, right? But he's like, okay, whatever you guys like, I guess. So we go in, the vibe in there, the guys are having beautiful coffees and playing checkers, and it's just, everything feels good. I said, come on, you gotta see the setup. And I take him downstairs, and he sees all of the instruments set up, everything mic'd, everything ready to go. And he says, whoa, you can really play music down here? And you can record it? And I said, yeah, we got a tape machine there. He says, huh. He said, I've got a couple of songs kicking around. Maybe we could try them here and just see how it goes, see how it sounds. For the next 7 months, he came out every day out there to try 2 more songs, and that became the basement tapes, where we ended up recording something like 144 pieces of music there that came out officially in the last couple of years. And out of this atmosphere came the band's first recording, Music from Big Pink.
The album came out, and I think because you had spent so much time in the company of Dylan, and Dylan was one who was very clear about keeping the world out. And I think in the book it comes through again and again that you and the rest of the band also sort of enjoyed the fact that you were up there in this upstate New York, sort of doing your thing outside of the spotlight. And so after that first record, you chose not to really do interviews and sort of just release the record and stay quiet. And Levon talks about, he feels the first 2 records were sort of one of a piece, where you could stay, you were sort of isolated from the rest of the world and can continue to work like this. But eventually you had to go out into the world and get back on stage and play. And there's a story in the book with some photos, I'm not sure if they were in the photo parade, when you chose to have your live debut as the band. Bill Graham had approached you and pitched, on the West Coast that you play at Winterland, which is important for later in the story. But just before the concert, you fell ill, or you began to not feel well, and you had to call someone to your aid to get through that particular concert.
So, what are you asking me?
Does hypnotism...
There's a lot of stuff.
Does hypnotism
You want
work?
the hypnotist story?
Yeah.
All right. So, after Music from Big Pink comes out, Rick Danko was in a terrible car accident, and he broke his neck and was in traction for months for this. So we didn't want, anybody to know, any of that. So that was the quiet thing. We didn't show up. We didn't go out there in the world like you put out a record, you go out and do a tour. And you do interviews and everybody knows who you are, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. It's the usual. We put out a record, it's like, who are these people? Where did they come from? What is this record? It has nothing to do with anything that's going on in music. And look at them. They look like they're from another city. All of this stuff. And it was not a look. That's just how we dressed every day, because we were living up in the mountains and some things just felt, natural. So there was no big, mysterious thing about all of this, except we had to wait for Rick to get better. In the meantime, out in the world, in the media, they're like, what are they doing up there in those mountains? those people, there's something very strange going up there. And so all of this mythology built up around this group. And I kind of liked it. I kind of liked the idea of not showing up, of just sending out the music, saying, there it is. That's it. See ya. And there was something about that. So then, because we couldn't go out tour, the record company says, we need to make another record. So we figure out, I start writing some songs, and because of Big Pink and the basement and all that, I didn't want to do the record in a recording studio in this atmosphere. I wanted our own atmosphere, our own environment. Again, the clubhouse. Some place that we could go and it would be ours. And, you know, instead of us going where the equipment is, just bring the equipment to us. So somehow this ended up being, because it got cold outside and everything in Woodstock, we ended up renting Sammy Davis Jr.'s house in the Hollywood Hills and turning his pool house into a studio. And it was like, and they soundproofed it from the outside, and we brought in the equipment, and we went into this sanctum, went in there, and made music that wasn't even necessarily an extension of what we had done on Music from Big Pink. It was some other kind of thing, and it was happening naturally, and it's a bit like that. It's a bit hard to describe what this feeling was, but in doing this, there was, from my first experience of going from Canada down to the Mississippi Delta at 16 years old, and boom, this impression that washes over me, that completely takes over all of my imagination and everything. And it's just like I hoped it would be. The rhythm of the Mississippi River, the way people talk, the people's names, the way they walked, everything was musical. And this Southern exposure went deep inside of me at 16 years old, because I came from so far away. My eyes were so big, and where somebody down there would take it for granted, to me, it was like, whoa, this is it. This is where I've wanted to go all of my 16 years, right? So now, at this point, this mythology, these ideas for songs, this Southern impression is creeping out of me in a songwriting way. And in the meantime, I really want to write a song that Levon can sing better than anybody in the world. So I wrote a song called The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Now, the idea that a Canadian wrote The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, but he was my brother. I wanted to so much do something incredible, and I wanted to let this thing loose, this mythology that I'd been carrying around in me. So we make this music, and we make this sound, and it becomes, skipping ahead a little bit, people say, wow, this is Americana. This is Americana music. And I'm saying to myself, North Americana. You know? So when we finished the recording at the Sammy Davis Jr. pool house there, next we had to play our first job now as the band that Bill Graham had us booked for at Winterland in San Francisco. I had poured so much into making this music and writing this and just doing everything in my power to find the magic in this, that the idea, what, now we've got to rehearse some songs for a what? We have to play a show. I was having so much trouble getting out of that zone into this zone. But I knew it was something that we had to do. So we started doing it, but I was still lost. I was lost. And then before we left to go to San Francisco, I realized that I was so burnt out, I was so drained, I was so run down that I just fell apart. Mm-hmm. I just fell to pieces, like physically, for this effort, whatever that creative muscle is. It just used me up. And we go, but we're running over some music, getting some ideas. And going to San Francisco, on the plane, I have a terrible fever. And I'm really, really feeling bad. I'm burning up now by the time we get there. So our manager, Albert Grossman, says to Bill Graham, we might have to postpone this because, Robbie's like really, really sick. And I was embarrassed about it. I was like, I didn't want to be sick. And, this was our first gig and everything. And it was all this stuff going on. Bill Graham says, there is no way in the world that we can cancel this. It's been built up and built up. They didn't come out and play. People are like foaming. You cannot cancel this. Whatever we have to do, we have to do. We can't. So I'm saying, I'll do my best. I'll do anything. But the guys were going and rehearsing at Winterland and everything, and I couldn't go. And I don't know if I've ever felt that bad before or since then, actually. But Bill Graham said, do you think it would be okay if we got a hypnotist to come and help Robbie and see if there is any way in the world that he could physically be capable of doing this? So I thought, I'm game for anything. Feeling that bad, I would have tried snake charmers. I was really, really that desperate. So this hypnotist, this French gentleman, Pierre Clement was his name. He comes and he's kind of a distinguished guy, and he's talking to me, and he's checking me out, and he's feeling this, and they're doing all of the thing, and he's saying, okay, how's this, and doing all this, and there's something about him that I think he's for real, this guy, and he's working on me, and I'm comfortable with him doing this. And over a period of hours that he was there with me, he says, okay, first of all, we're going to concentrate on this. We're going to bring this fever down. And he's doing all of this stuff. And finally, I'm getting a little bit more strength. And he's going to try a little bit of soup and all this stuff. And the next thing, I'm getting dressed. And the guys are already there. at Winterland, and they're just waiting to see if I'm going to be able to make it. So this hypnotist is bringing me to Winterland, and I'm kind of like zoned out. I'm like wherever, driving along. He says to me, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go out there, and you're going to play, you're going to do your music. At some point in there, if you don't feel well, if you feel yourself getting really weak, or you're going to get lightheaded or faint or anything like that, I'm going to be standing over at the side of the stage. You look over at me at that point, and I'm going to say to you, grow. And it will get you through it. It will make you feel okay. And I'm like, okay. At this point, I'm completely in his hands. And so I walk into the place like the guys, the other guys in the group, they're looking at me like, hello, and I'm just in this zone. And I go, and they introduce us, and I go out, and I put on my guitar, and I'm playing, and I'm looking at the audience, and it's all completely surreal. And Levon, is saying, one song at a time. Just see how you do. Just one song at a time. And we're going along, we're playing. All of a sudden, I feel like my balance is getting away on me. I look over at him. Now, by that, the crowd is screaming and cheering and whistling, and we're playing, and the sound system and everything's going on. But this wave comes over me, and I look over at Pierre Clement, and he goes, grow. And I can hear it louder than the audience or the music or anything. And I was like, right back up. And it was like, this is a miracle. This is amazing what's happening. So we weren't able to play a long time that first night, but he got me through enough of it, that we were able to show up. And by the next day, I was feeling a little bit better, and the next day was like a 3-night thing, I think. And so it was just a phenomenal experience, to this. And during that, when the hypnotist was working on me, I said, listen, do you think that there's something, that I'm crazy? Do you think that this is stage fright? That I'm really scared or something like that? He said, you got a really bad fever. I don't know about that stage fright stuff. He said, but we're just going to work on what we know here. I'm
going to press the fast forward button a bit, but still pivot on the fact of Winterland, and maybe you're being exhausted from all the work. The group had gone back on the road. It was the early 70s. You were now in the limelight. People were loving what you were doing. The scene was a little more intense now with drugs and liquor. And of course, when you're making a lot of money, people come to you and offer you things that they weren't offering you before. And over a period of time, you succumb. And at a certain point, you start noticing that people around you in the scene are starting to succumb to those temptations. People are dying. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Brian Jones. And you begin to lose this affection that you once had maybe for the road. And you have some sense that the arc is coming to a close. And you pitch to the band that maybe it's time we take a bit of a breather from the road. But before we do, why don't we go out in style? And why don't we go back to where we started? Let's have a concert at Winterland and take a break. And so comes the Last Waltz.
Well, it was, yeah. It's very true. In this period, coming out of the 60s, there was something, everybody was experimenting, and it was all done with kind of a spirit of it wasn't dark. It was kind of, Timothy Leary and all these people in the Beatles doing Sgt. Pepper and LSD and all this stuff. It's kind of like, wow, this is like, it is, mind expanding or whatever it was. It didn't feel like what happened after, where things, and as you mentioned, some dear friends were dying, and it was like, and it seemed to be getting darker and darker and darker. In the 70s, it was no longer experiencing and experimenting and everything. It was like hardcore. And the band wasn't unique in this at all. There was so many other musicians and so many groups and everything that were going through the same thing. And what we didn't know anything about was addiction. We didn't understand that one person does this and says, it's all right. Another person does it and says, whoa, we got to get a whole bunch more of that. We didn't understand how the different things affected different people. And within the band, Richard Manuel, he was an alcoholic since he was a kid. And it would come in different stages with him. But he had such an addictive part of his soul that he had no control over. And it was heartbreaking. And then in the group, there was 3 guys experimenting with heroin. And that will separate you. Heroin does not bring you closer. I just hate to bring it to you, but, And so all of this, it was just going in darker and darker and darker. And on the road out there, it felt dangerous. Everywhere we went, there was all these kind of people showing up. Everybody had something. They were slipping you, and I got this, and I got that. And it was just like, boy, something is bad is going to happen here. We need to get out of the way. We need to do something in a survival mode here, was what I was trying to offer in it. And because we had played, like we talked about, the funkiest joints anybody ever played, to the biggest concerts in the world. We had been around the mountain and had seen it all. And at this point, I thought, why don't we pull the train into the station? Why don't we then get out of the public eye, get out of the way, and see what we need to do? We don't want anything to happen out there in front of everybody. Let's have our privacy here. And in doing so, in the name of music, in honor of this beautiful blessing that we've had, and all of these amazing experiences, and the music that we've been able to stir up out in the world, let's have a celebration. Let's go back to the first place we played, Winterland, like full circle. And we're going to play there, and it's going to be a musical celebration, and maybe we'll invite Ronnie Hawkins to come and Bob Dylan, our 2 fearless leaders that we had been through amazing things together and had made such a contribution to our story and our musical journey. So the guys all said, whoa, this sounds nice. Sounds nice, sounds respectful, of what's the gift in this journey that we've had. Everybody was feeling good about that. But then one of the guys said, "What if we invite Ronnie and Bob? Don't we need to invite Eric Clapton? I mean, he's been waving the flag for the bands from the very beginning." We were like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. We should ask Eric if he would like to come too." And then it was like, you're going to invite Eric and not invite Van Morrison? That's just wrong, right? And so over a period of time, really in a musicality sense of these ideas coming in, then it was like, what, we're not going to have the Canadians? We're not going to have Joni and Neil Young? That's ridiculous. We have to have, and it started going to this place of all of these people that we respected so much, and we were part of a musical circle in a way, and we had all done something and sent it out into the world and tried to do something beautiful, and we felt a family in this. And so then we got to a place where it was like, I know, but if you're going to do this, you got to have Muddy Waters, right? Mm-hmm. Come on, Muddy, right? And then it was like, oh, because Muddy would be representing the Mississippi Delta to Clarksdale, Mississippi, to the Chicago blues of Chess Records. Wow, then we got to have Dr. John the Night Tripper come in from New Orleans.
Amen.
You got to have that piece of music too. So everybody was representing different elements of it. And it started to feel like this circle, like this is a beautiful gathering. And so we're going to do this concert. It's only the band. Only to advertise it's the band playing. Then Bill Graham says, if you're going to do this, you've got to figure out how to document it for the archives. This may never, ever happen again. And it started out in the same kind of simple way. Well, he said, I could put up a couple of black and white video cameras, and at least it would be archived, And then they were like, I know, but that's going to look ugly. Don't you need to get a couple of 16 millimeter cameras? And then they're like, well, if you're going to have 16, you need to get 3 cameras. You can't do it with 2. You got to have 3. And it started evolving. And then I had the audacity to ask Martin Scorsese if he would direct this, if we would do this. And Marty was in the middle of shooting a movie. And I told him about it, and he was like, oh my God, I love everybody you're talking about. It's my favorites, everything. He said, but I'm shooting a movie. And they really don't like it when you go and shoot another movie while you're doing a movie. So he said, I don't know. So we hung out that evening, and we talked about some of Joni Mitchell's songs, and and it's kind of incredible because to this day, she's still the queen bee of all of the singer-songwriters. And then I said, God, I just don't know what song we would do with Muddy Waters. Should we do It Got My Mojo Working, but it just won't work on you? Or should we do... And finally Marty goes, that's it. They can fire me. They can sue me. They can kill me. I don't care. I've got to do this. But don't tell anybody. Right? So for the next, I guess, 2.5 months or something, all of these pieces started coming together in the underground that nobody knew about this. And then Marty was bringing in these cinematographers and this production designer, and all of the elements were just growing in a real natural way. And it was never, ever, nobody was thinking, oh boy, this is going to be big. That wasn't the point at all. The point was, this is going to be so authentic. This is going to be everybody that we would want to be there, and we're going to celebrate music as good as anybody ever has.
And you did. Now, I know I'm not the only one who, when they got the book, flipped to the end. And those of you who have done that, you realize that testimony finishes essentially with the Last Waltz, which was in 1976. Robbie, you've had a long career doing many, many things since. So as we sort of wind down our conversation, are we going to hear the rest of the story someday?
Yeah. This was as much as I could bite off in this storytelling thing. So yes, I'm going to write the next episode, and that's when things really get crazy. You know?